colleagues, distinguished guests, and delegates. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome. This is the 10th edition of the Teachers' Conference and the first held online. Every day in our profession, we challenge ourselves to do better for our people and country. Not just in the way we apply pedagogy and technology, but more importantly, in the way we inspire and nurture. Today, I will focus our sharing on two sets of issues. The immediate and urgent, dealing with COVID-19, and the important and existential, developing the potential of our people and country. Let me start with COVID-19, which has thrown the world a curveball. Many places in the world saw school closures and the education of their people disrupted. Singapore has been fortunate thus far. We managed to keep our schools open for most of the time. Together with home-based learning and remote classes, our children have been able to continue learning. All this did not just happen because we had the financial resources or the technical capabilities. Instead, it is because we had all of you, capable and dedicated educators. You were the ones who pulled together the resources, developed the new curriculum and schedule, worked with the students and parents to transit to the new arrangements, making sure that no child would be left behind without access to the internet and devices, and a conducive environment at home or in school. Without all of you, we would not have gotten this far. So much so that when we had to swing into full HBL again at very short notice a few weeks back, many of you shared with me that you hardly missed a beat in the transition. I know it is hard work, but you have kept the system ready. Well done, and thank you all. Ultimately, this is not about technology alone. It is about dedication and commitment. However, COVID-19 has not blown over. We do not know when the pandemic will end. We may never be able to go back to a pre-COVID world. We must be prepared for unexpected developments such as new and more virulent mutations, bringing with them new transmission characteristics, demanding us to update our disease control methods, challenging us to update our methods to keep schools as safe and open spaces for learning. Amidst all this, perhaps offering us new perspectives to educate and develop the next generation to be even more adaptable and resilient. In a more complicated environment, we must be able to continue operating our education system more sustainably with targeted ways. This may require us to have more rapid and pervasive testing capabilities, more rapid isolation capabilities to ring-fence the affected parts of our system while allowing the rest of the system to continue operating as normally as possible. Combining with the latest vaccination programs, it may give us some semblance of normalcy in a new way. It will also likely require us to be able to toggle amongst different modes of teaching and learning as circumstances dictate. Blended learning is not an optional good to have. Blended learning is an opportunity we need to seize to teach our people to adapt flexibly amidst uncertainties. COVID-19 will one day pass us by. The virus will not define us, but our responses will. Let me move on to the second part of our sharing today, the important and existential part of our work. Bringing out the best in our people, individually and collectively as a nation. Why important and existential? History has never been kind to small city-states with no natural hinterland. We must keep ourselves safe and secure. we must earn our keep. We only have our people, their talents and gumption. Compounding our challenge will be how we forge a nation from diverse roots and with diverse aspirations, constantly buffeted by the centrifugal forces of competing ideas and identities from countries and societies which are larger, more powerful, and with longer historical lineage. For our little red dot to keep shining, we need to enable our people to be competent to earn our keep with the world as our hinterland and markets. We need to engender the confidence in our people of our place in the world and to chart our own destiny. We need to distinguish ourselves as a people with our principles and values. Economic success alone will not make us a nation and a people. Economic success buys us time to build our confidence to chart our way forward and bond us as a people regardless of race, language, religion, ancestry, and starting point in life, through thick and thin. Therein lies our challenges in the education service to build a distinguished people and nation that we can all be proud of. Our predecessors have done much good work in developing the 21st century competencies, or 21cc as we fondly call it. When I read up on the 21cc, I can't help but admire the efforts and quality of thinking that have gone into developing it. It is comprehensive and thorough. It is something we should and will need to apply consistently and diligently over many years to see results. As with many things we do, we cannot measure success by the here and now. But we know, deep in our hearts, that success will only be manifested when the next generation grows up better than us, exhibiting the qualities and values that we have planted with the seeds we sow today. Let me share a story of a little boy who grew up in a non-English speaking home. With limited resources to buy books and without confidence to read anything beyond picture books for kids. One day, his form teacher brought him to the school library, told him to choose a thick book, asked him to bring it home to read. The little boy was overwhelmed. He had never read such a book before, one without pictures and more than 100 pages long. The teacher encouraged the boy to read one page at a time, imagining that he could finish each page like a picture book that he used to read. It took the little boy time and courage. After completing the book, the teacher asked him to help by being a school librarian. The boy's curiosity was piqued. His confidence grew. Since then, the boy has kept reading and learning. The teacher was Miss Low of Macpherson Primary School. The little boy was me. Thank you, Miss Low, for igniting the curiosity in me, for giving me the confidence. All of us will have one or more such inspiring teachers in our lives. You may also have been a Miss Low in someone's life. Thank you to all for being the Miss Low of our children's lives. I share this story because I believe the foundation of all competencies is the combination of curiosity and discipline. Curiosity, once ignited, will propel a child to learn. Discipline, once ingrained, will enable a child to pursue, master, and perfect whatever he or she desires to learn. Before I continue, perhaps we can pause for a moment to reflect and give thanks to that special teacher in our lives. It is said that when a child is confident, there is no challenge too big to overcome. On the other hand, when a child loses confidence, there is no challenge too small that the child will not fear and succumb to. There are 3 dimensions of confidence that we should be aware of. Confidence to compete in a more globalized world, confidence to accept ourselves, and confidence to chart our path as a people. I once met a young Singaporean lady. She was the station manager for Silk Air in Chiang Mai, Thailand. She was then a recent graduate. She was responsible for the airport operations and the local sales office. She knew not a single word of Thai prior to her posting. She was never taught airport operations or sales in school. What gave her the confidence to take up such a job overseas? I was intrigued. I reflected. It was certainly not just the hard competencies that our system had equipped her with. It was something more. It was the confidence that her teachers and parents had nurtured in her. It was her confidence to learn and learn fast that got her the job. This may sound strange, but many of the things our children learn may be outdated by the time they enter the job market. The average lifespan of Fortune 500 companies has shrunk from 50 years to 15 years in recent decades. Even for those companies that are around longer, their products have changed beyond recognition every 5 to 10 years. The cutting edge of business models and technology application is now more often than not found in startups and the skunk works of global companies.
Extended reading of long text. Now, in Singapore, you're doing very well on all of those things. That's not the problem. The question I have is this a problem? Is this a problem that these new ways of thinking might actually displace some of the old ways of thinking? Now, in the tradition of European universities, we really like extended reading. We talk about reading for a degree. You know, we kind of associate reading long books, big books, with knowing important things. But is that so appropriate anymore? Do we really need to think about some of the practices that our young people have around knowledge and thinking and understanding? Maybe they're perhaps more productive for them than reading long text. Or maybe there are ways that we can bring these two more into harmony, so that perhaps spending more time engaging with immersive environments might also give some of the skills that provide for extended reading. What I love is that your framework has thinking right in the middle of it. So I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about some we will be very familiar with algorithms and heuristics as things that sit inside computers. But I'm sure that also in your classrooms, you're beginning to help your students to think, understand what happens when big data sets are used, how those data sets might in some instances be biased or might not show us the whole picture. The more that we support our learners to think with computers and to think like computers, we will be coming across ethical issues about the sorts of jobs we want computers to do, the sorts of thinking we want them to do for us, and the kind of thinking that we want human beings to really stay in charge of. A rather wonderful theorist called Douglas Rushkoff said in 2010 that the choice facing young people was to program or be programmed. In other words, will you be mastering the technology, or will you be in the hands of other people who are mastering it for you? And I think this idea that if we're not coding, if we're not programming, if we're not understanding the computational world around us, then we are very much likely to be disempowered in relation to it. Now, the second kind of thinking, which is very related, I want to talk about, is design thinking. And actually, I was just looking on my bookshelves as we were speaking at the start of this, and I don't know if I found this book called Teaching as Design Science. I'll try and make it show up. It's called Teaching as Design Science. I'll put in a link to the chat window at the end. And it's by Diana Laurillard, whose thinking has influenced some of the frameworks that the minister. And she talks about the fact that teaching is a form of design. You know, when we think ahead about our students' needs and how we might meet them with learning patterns and with learning activities, then we're functioning a little bit as designers. It's a very much an applied knowledge. We learn through planning, designing, doing, and making. And increasingly, in most parts of the economy, design thinking will be used as a form of applied knowledge. So one of the things that our young people will be gathering through design thinking will be sort of spatial and visual literacy. Again, very different to reading an extended text, understanding how things are put together, understanding the user experience, understanding audiences and different forms of knowledge practice that might appeal to them. Unlike other kinds of thinking that perhaps we value in the Western university, design thinking is almost always collaborative. People get together in design sprints and teams, they prototype things, there's a lot of playing to different strengths in a team, and there's also a lot of originality that goes into it. And so design thinking is a kind of thinking about all that can be relevant in all kinds of topics. Even if you don't have, for example, in your own toolkit, the capacity to code an app, you certainly have the ability to imaginatively support your students while they design an app on paper. And one of the things I've put on this slide is a design environment called Miro that I use a lot for doing design thinking with teachers. Because I just find that using that very visual environment with colour and shape and moving things around helps to free us up to think about learning in perhaps more original ways than writing down learning outcomes in a box might do. I found this designer, whose name I may mispronounce, called Vu Quan Nguyen Mas, who said that design is the new philosophy. It's the new kind of super discipline that all other disciplines have to look up to in the way that perhaps they did look up to philosophy. Now, I don't want to say too much about data thinking because I know from working with some of you yesterday that you're very aware already of the need for your students to understand data and how data works. Really from the most basic level right up to kind of using data sets in the classroom. It might be very simple uses of data. It might be just understanding how data can be used against us and how to protect ourselves from it. But again, like computational thinking, it's about understanding that the world we live in is a world made of data. And if we don't have data skills, then for sure, we are shedding data every time we breathe, every time we put on a smartwatch, every time we engage with an app, every time we go to school, we are shedding data. And other people will use those data if we don't understand ourselves how they could be used. A wonderful thinker and activist from the Open Data Institute very recently said, we need to work with data, we need to have people who are on the tools, but all of us need to understand how data creates new constraints and new risks for us as a society. And whatever subject you teach, that's true. I've got two more, and this one is about hybrid media. So I've mentioned a bit earlier about how we might need to think with different media. Perhaps you're thinking in the classroom with video, perhaps you're using animation, perhaps you're taking your students into kind of little lightweight virtual worlds like GatherTown, for example, where they can play with an avatar and use that as a way of finding a new identity and interacting in new ways. Perhaps you're using very simple media, but the fact that they can be linked together through one device and the screen creates a new kind of way of thinking. So whereas we used to have a textbook and our words, now we have this amazing richness of resources. But that in itself creates new distractions, as I think that research about reading showed. It creates new loops that students can fall into, as well as creating new opportunities for our students to surprise us with what they can do with their skills. And these three skills of curation, creation, and connection that kind of define how we are and how we communicate with each other in the digital world have all sorts of corollaries in the classroom. Tagging, reviewing, liking, emoting, reacting, translating things from one medium to another. Gunter Kress, who's a colleague, sadly has passed on, who I worked with and was privileged to work with, used to say, how shall I express this? How shall I express this idea? I have so much choice now. Shall I use music? Shall I sing it? Shall I put it on the screen? And these choices that our students have, we should be working with every day in a very rich way. And one of those I finally want to come to is kind of immersive thinking. So what does it mean to be able to be in a fully immersive environment where we might be learning things in a very sensorily rich way? This comes from a recent exhibition at the Science Centre Singapore that I liked, and I kind of grabbed the image. I thought it was really evocative of what it might be like to learn in an incredibly immersive and sensory fashion. But, you know, even just stringing together images and photographs and videos as a montage can give our students a really rich and sensory experience of the topics we want them to learn. And I love, again, this quote from Douglas Copeland about how immersive learning really activates all kinds of parts of our brain, not just the thinking part, but the feeling part. Even the sense of where we are with our bodies in space is activated through these immersive ways of thinking. So I've kind of galloped through a whole range of ways that I think how we think might be changing, and I'm sure you have ideas of your own, and some of those ways of thinking will speak to you as a classroom practitioner. Some of them will speak to you from your subject expertise and background more than others. So I just want to slow the pace down a little bit and ask, you know, what this means for us in the future. Because of course we are not just thinkers, you know, as this pandemic has shown us. We're people with whole lives to live. You know, we are experiencing global shocks. We're experiencing radical changes in how we work and how we live together and how we expect to do that in the future. We have to share these lives with computers, with screens, with mobile devices, and I guess any kind of digital literacy framework that we might have, any kind of curriculum we might have, is a sort of story about the future. We're telling a story to ourselves and our young people about the kind of future they're going to live in and what they will need to thrive there. And so we have this extraordinary responsibility to get, not always to get that right, because we can't, but to do that thinking with our young people in a very transparent way and in a way that empowers and involves them. So I think living with uncertainty means creating new ways that we can be resilient. So what does digital resilience mean? Okay. One of the things I think it might mean, and I know you heard about this yesterday from your keynote, so I'm very happy to cut across that, would be thinking about wellness and well-being in new ways. So I know in Singapore you have this concern for all these different issues that might be impacting on your young people and on your older people as well. Issues around cyberbullying and your digital footprint, how aware you are of that. Issues about how we manage this abundance of opinion that's out there, some of which might be rather unhealthy opinion for us, but all of which we are going to have to sort of engage with. And I think any digital literacy program needs to start really at its heart with how we stay well and how we keep our young people well. Because, as I say, we don't just think about the future, we have to live in it, we have to live with each other in it, and we have to live well in it. So I'm really glad to see that resilience and well-being are so much a focus of the new skills that you're developing in your professional development, and that the ministry is promoting here. This idea of how can we all flourish in a highly screen-based world, in a highly screen-based society? What are the risks? How can we mitigate them? How can we make our young people aware of them without disempowering them and frightening them, because they need to take ownership of this digital world and make it their own? It's very interesting that some of the more modern and contemporary frameworks that have come forward recently, this one being promoted by the World Economic Forum, begin to focus a little bit more on those issues of well-being, behaviour, identity, empathy. You know, I think one of the things we've all learned, haven't we, in the last little while, as we've had to do more things through the screen, is how to build relationships online. I'm here today thanks to the great work of many people, but I particularly have a wonderful team of facilitators, and Chun, Carmen, who I've never met. But we've built this relationship that we can bring this session to you together solely through online, because we have those skills of building empathy and relationship with each other online that perhaps a year ago, you know, we'd have done it, but it might have been more of a struggle. And so these new frameworks are beginning to focus not just on how we think online, but how we feel online and how we make each other feel and how we can develop new relationships, perhaps that don't have all the nuance of me being in a room with you, sharing a cup of tea afterwards. I'd love to do that, but that we can still get something from it and we can still feel this connection through time and space. And I guess as well as resilience, one of the key things that, as well as well-being, one of the key things that resilience comes from would be values, because the technology is going to change. The technology is changing today, the technology will change tomorrow. But the values we have for that technology can stay more constant. We can remind ourselves of them, we can remind each other of them, we can remind each other of why we think technology is worth having, and we can remind each other of the risks that we think are not worth taking. So, what are the values we might have around computers in the classroom? How far could that go? How far do we want to relinquish our human connection with young people and bring technologies into the classroom to support their learning? We are in control of those ethics, and many countries around the world, many non-governmental organisations, the Singapore government, are producing some guiding principles. And okay, these are principles for governments, they're principles for scientists, they're principles for technology companies and developers, but they're also principles for educators as well, that the decisions we make around technology in the classroom, we have to be able to explain them to each other in human terms and justify them. We have to make sure that all the systems we're using have human beings at the centre and the heart of them. And this is something this is a conversation I think we can also begin to have with our young people. Now, one of the things that worries many teachers, I'm sure none of you here, because you are all empowered digital educators, but certainly when I began talking about some of this, 20, 25 years ago, one of the big fears that there was around was that computers would be replacing teachers. And I came into this piece about the future talking about how actually cognitive labour, the kind of thinking work that is teaching and learning, is being taken on, not necessarily taken over, but taken on by machine-supported ways of thinking. I doubt any of us could get through a day in the classroom without computers supporting our thinking somehow, even if it's just the administration, there's some support going on there. But I looked at this piece of work that was done by our Office of National Statistics in the UK at the kind of jobs that were most at risk from the computer age and from and I've picked out this yellow spot. I don't know if you can see it on the slide. The yellow spot is secondary school teachers. And secondary school teachers are right at the lower end of risk. In other words, we are really not very much at risk from being taken over by computers, because the content of what we do day to day is rich, it's interactive, it's interpersonal, it's constantly responding. And there are aspects of what we do to socialise our young people that I would argue only human beings can do for each other. You may disagree, and maybe this can be part of our conversation afterwards. But certainly the analysis of the content of our jobs suggests that we are at very low risk as teachers. So well done. You went into a very secure profession. You're very secure against those computers coming over the horizon. And I think this is because, the values that we have as educators are really the ones we need for resilience for the future. Now, I want to close by talking briefly about a project I did with the Nestor Future Lab. Actually, every time I think about this project, I feel older because it was also about 13 years ago. And this was a project for the British government to think about what we called education beyond current horizons. And at that time, beyond current horizons meant 2025. So the horizon that seemed to us impossibly distant is approaching very quickly now, And I sometimes wonder that whether anything we said then has any relevance. But I think it does. In fact, quite recently there was a conference based on this work. And the reason I think it continues to be relevant is that we didn't make too many predictions about the technical future. What we did was we created some stories about three possible worlds, three possible ways that technology and human beings might live together. And we used those worlds as tools for thinking with. So instead of saying, we're all going to be arriving at school with our jetpacks on our backs in 2025, we talked about how learning would be distributed, how the rewards of technology would be distributed, how generations might live together, how people might connect with each other. And those three worlds became and have been useful tools for thinking with about the future. And if any of you are interested to explore those specific worlds, I'm really happy to share some links with you. But that form of futures thinking is available to anybody. We can all create futures worlds for thinking with. And one of the most exciting